Saudi Arabia is the key Arab state
Hmm.
in the region, certainly in terms of its role in world energy markets,
Hmm.
certainly in terms of its wealth, its symbolism, because Islam's holiest places, Mecca and Medina, are
Hmm.
located within Saudi Arabia. So, Saudi Arabia is, not only from Washington's perspective, but even more so from Trump and Kushner's
Hmm.
commercial, transactional perspective, if you will.
Hmm.
For them, it's the key Arab state, particularly so at a time of growing U.S. Chinese tensions, where
Hmm.
China is now the largest customer for Saudi oil, and is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, also the largest investor in a foreign investor in Saudi Arabia, and certainly is the source of the highest proportion of Saudi imports from
Hmm.
any foreign country. So, as you may remember, in 2020, um, uh, Trump and Kushner engineered what they grandiloquently
Abraham
called the
Accords.
Abraham Accords, basically normalization accords between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco on the one hand, and Israel on the other. And then it was understood that the
Hmm.
real prize, of course, would be Saudi Arabia, because that's when the dam breaks. I
Hmm.
mean, these three countries I mentioned are tiddlywinks compared to Saudi Arabia. And Trump lost the election. There's a lot of speculation that if he would have won the election, he
Yeah.
probably would have been able to achieve a Saudi Saudi-Israeli normalization agreement. That's at least what a lot of people believe. I'm not so sure. But
Hmm.
then Biden comes in. And the thing to understand about Biden, because, we need to focus as much on continuity as we do with change.
Yeah.
Biden did not renounce or change a single one of Trump's Middle East policies, whether with respect to Palestine, whether with respect to Western Sahara,
Hmm.
whether with respect to Iran, or indeed anything else. And so
Fascinating.
Biden's position was again one of strategic neglect of the Palestinians and of promoting Arab-Israeli normalization, not as leverage to achieve Middle East peace, but as leverage to further marginalize and isolate the Palestinians and leave them exclusively at Israel's mercy, at the mercy of Israeli unilateralism.
Hmm.
Um, but the reason it didn't succeed is because this agreement is fundamentally not a Saudi-Israeli normalization agreement, but a bilateral Saudi-American agreement. What do I mean by that? Well, the key elements of this agreement are that the United States would provide Saudi Arabia with a formal security guarantee,
Hmm.
with a civilian nuclear program, including enrichment capabilities, and in return, Saudi Arabia would place explicit limits on its commercial and security relationship with China and on its cooperation with Russia, which is the world's largest oil producer, in terms of what is known as the OPEC plus
Yeah.
arrangement. Um, Problem here is that these American commitments are not in the gift of the White House. They actually need congressional endorsement.
Hmm.
And it wasn't going to get through Congress. And so the whole idea that was first proposed by Trump and then adopted by Biden is if you include Saudi Israeli normalization as part of this package, then you will have a number of senators who are opposed to an improvement in Saudi American relations, but who will sign off on this agreement because of Saudi Arabia recognizing Israel and leaving the Palestinians at the mercy of Netanyahu. So the reason this didn't go anywhere is because at the time, Israel was only being required to make a few cosmetic gestures,
Hmm.
not even towards the Palestinians, but towards the Palestinian Authority. But given the extremist nature of the Israeli government, and I don't need to get into details here, I think, even that was too much for them. So it was a logjam. And the Biden administration was actually hoping to use this to persuade Netanyahu to ditch those coalition partners who are even more to the extreme right than he is and replace them with more centrist coalition partners. Well, this didn't work for two reasons. First of all, that Netanyahu is on the extreme right of the political spectrum himself. And second of all, that his alternative coalition partners who would have been willing to go along with these cosmetic gestures to the Palestinian Authority, was not prepared to play that role if it meant the United States giving Saudi Arabia a nuclear program. So that wasn't going to happen either. Then October 7th happened, Israel's genocidal military campaign the Gaza Strip commenced, and it became impossible, increasingly difficult for Saudi Arabia to proceed with such an agreement unless there were clear and more explicit and firmer and more irreversible U.S. Israeli guarantees of an end to the Israeli occupation, which made it even more impossible for Israel to go along with this. So the Saudis then went to the Americans and they said, look, the Israelis are, have fallen off the planet in terms of fallen off the spectrum. They're just, too crazy to deal with right now. Why don't we do a bilateral U.S. Saudi agreement in which we agree to limit our relationships with China and Russia, and you give us the formal security guarantee. And Biden said, absolutely no way. If this agreement doesn't serve Israel, there's not going to be an agreement. Now you have Trump. And here is, I think, the difference. On the one hand, Trump may well be willing to go along with the bilateral US Saudi deal that excludes Israel because of all the benefits it would have to the United States. The question is whether in 2025 Saudi Arabia would still be prepared to do this. I suspect they will because there are important achievements for Saudi Arabia in it as well. And in such a situation, I think, Trump would basically tell the Israelis, you're on your own. We're not going to pressure the Saudis to normalize relations with you. And we're also not going to pressure you to stop annexing West Bank territory. It's all yours. Go ahead. That's the one scenario. The other scenario is that Trump, who is very much motivated by personal animus and achievements and big and shiny objects, may want to prove that in fact he is the one who would have succeeded in this agreement. It's Biden who failed, and perhaps with an eye on a Nobel Peace Prize or whatever, will then go ahead and push for this three-way agreement that includes Saudi Israeli normalization. And the question then becomes, what is the price that Washington is prepared to make Israel pay for such an agreement? And it's in that context that we should understand Netanyahu's statement yesterday about if the Saudis are so eager for a Palestinian state, they should create one in Saudi Arabia.
Yep. Thank you.